Hello learners, I am Dr. Teju Shakalita and today I am going to discuss about the Strawson's concept of person. It is in the module 11 and the number of this unit is unit 15. Now, after going through this unit, you will be able to explain Strawson's concept of person, you will be able to learn the Cartesian concept of person, you will be able to describe the no ownership theory and you will be able to discuss the incoherence of the no ownership theory and you will be again able to discuss and explain the concept of P predicates and you'll be able to distinguish between P predicates and M predicates. Now, so far as this particular unit is concerned, this unit introduces to you Strawson's concept of person. Now, so far as Strawson's concept of person is concerned, you will find that the concept person is found in the third chapter of his celebrated work, that is Individuals, and which is subtitled Essays in Descriptive Metaphysics. Now, as suggested by the subtitle, Strawson is here engaged in describing the actual structure of our thought about the world and not in presenting a better structure as done by revisionary metaphysics. Now, the basic concepts included in this unit are what is person according to Strawson, Strawson's analysis of Cartesian dualism, Strawson's distinction between P and M predicate, and Barton Williams' views on Strawson's concept of P predicates. Now, what is the concept of person? In ordinary language, we use the word person as taken to be a synonymous with the word man. But in Strawson's terminology, the word person is used in a spatial sense, although it is not different from the ordinary sense. Now, so far as Strawson is concerned, he begins his essay by distinguishing persons from non-persons. He uses the expressions ourself and states of ourselves to represent person and your states and what is not ourselves of states of ourselves to be represent non-persons as their states. Now, while speaking of ourselves ordinarily, we ascribe to ourselves many things such as actions and intentions. Now I am doing this, I want to do this. Sensations, I am in pain. Thoughts and feelings, I think and I am angry. Perceptions and memories, I see this, I remember this, and many other things. Again, we also speak of ourselves not only in terms of such temporary conditions of sensations, perceptions and feelings, but also in terms of relatively permanent characteristics such as height, weight, coloring, shape, size, etc. Like I am 5 foot tall, weight 50 kilos, of fair complexion, etc. Now, so far as Strawson's point is concerned, I want to say that so far as Strawson is concerned, he always tries to say that these two ways of speaking about ourselves are totally different. While it is obvious that the second way of speaking in terms of height, weight, coloring, shapes and size are also the way in which we speak of material bodies, the pillar is 5 foot tall, weight 50 kilo, or brown color or dark color or fair color. The former way of speaking in terms of actions and intentions, sensations, thoughts and feelings, etc. is not applicable to material bodies. These states of consciousness are peculiar to ourselves alone. Now, what Strawson goes to emphasize at this point is that while speaking of ourselves as the 5 foot tall and being happy or angry, we ascribe both physical characteristics and states of consciousness to the very same thing. Now, that is, I admit of both physical states and the states of consciousness at the same time in the same sense. In other words, it may be said that the Strawson does not recognize the dichotomy between mind and body insofar as a person, the same person can be spoken of either of the ways in terms of his thoughts and feelings or in terms of his heights and weight. At this point, Strawson goes to consider two possible reactions to his thesis that both physical characteristics and states of consciousness are ascribed at the same time to one and the same thing, that is persons. Now, these reactions are the effect that it is a linguistic illusion that we ascribe both these states to one and the same thing. The first reaction Strawson considered is from the camp of the Cartesians, that is, the followers of Descartes. According to them, what we call a person is actually a combination of two distinct substances belonging to two different types, each of which has its own characteristic states and properties. Now, none of the states or properties belonging to one substance can be presented by the other. Hence, the Cartesian challenge the claim of Strawson that both states of consciousness and physical characteristics are ascribed to one and the same thing. Rather, they opine that states of consciousness are ascribed to the substance, while the physical states are ascribed to the other. Now, so far as Strawson's view of no ownership theory is concerned, we'll find that the second reaction Strawson thinks come from Wittgenstein and Schelling. It maintains a view that our states of consciousness are not ascribed to anything. This view is called by Strawson's no ownership or no subject doctrine of the self. In order to illustrate this no ownership doctrine, Strawson takes the help of an example given by Wittgenstein of the two uses of I in the two sentences. I have a toothache and I have a bad tooth. These two sentences, although grammatically similar, are completely different in nature. The sentence I have a bad tooth says that there is a bad tooth in my mouth. On the other hand, the bad tooth is in my possession, and in the same sense that a matchbox is my possession. When I say I have a matchbox. On the other hand, this particular I, as approached in this sense, is logically equivalent with Skinner, a different person, because there is nothing peculiar about my having the matchbox than Skinner's having the matchbox. Both I and Skinner are of the same status. One important point is to be taken note of is that when we put I and Skinner on the same level, then we put emphasis on the physical aspects of that particular thing alone. That is, in the sentence, both I and Skinner are understood only as physical bodies. This use of the word I is the possessor sense. But this possessor sense of I is different from the non-possessor sense as represented by the sentence I have a toothache. A toothache is an experience, a state of consciousness which, according to Wittgenstein, cannot be possessed by anyone. Hence, there is no place for an ego to own the experience. Strawson here distinguishes within the Wittgenstein scheme between two senses of the verb to have, having one and having two. The first kind of having is characterized by the logical transferability of ownership, as in the case of a matchbox or a car. But experiences, for example a toothache, are not owned in the sense as its ownership cannot be transferred. This kind of having is having two and cannot be called a having at all. So experiences are not owned by anything except in the dubious sense of being causally dependent upon the state of particular body. But in the Cartesian scheme, an ego is feigned in order to provide an owner in a logically non-transferable sense to experiences. But the no ownership theorists maintain that since a non-transferable ownership is not possible, there is no need to imagine an ego for the purpose. An ego should be eliminated from the picture altogether. Belief in ego is because of confusion. Strawson, however, does not think that the theory is coherent. In his analysis, the theory believes only in that kind of having where the ownership is logically transferable, so that the statement that I have X matchbox becomes a contingent statement, because the X which I have now could be had by someone else also. Now that they also believe that experiences can be had by someone in the sense that They are causally dependent on the state of particular body. The owing of these experiences must be in the transferable sense. This implies that the statement that I have a toothache is also a contingent statement. The statement takes the form in the hands to our theorists like all my toothaches are had by uniquely dependent upon the states of body B. What Strawson points out here is that the theorist cannot drop the possessive word my without contradicting his own position. For one thing, the word my cannot be simply dropped in which case the sentence would be all toothaches are causally dependent upon the states of body B, because it is an obviously false statement. If, on the other hand, he goes to replace the word my with the expression person P, is then also he cannot get rid of a possessive word. But if he goes to reduce the word to body B, then the states would be all body B's toothaches are causally dependent upon the states of body B. Obviously, the sentences that becomes a tautology or a necessary truth. But a theorist maintained that all sentences asserting possessions are contingent sentences because he does not believe in any kind of possessing where ownership is not transferable. Thus, the theorist had to find himself in a dilemma. He cannot either drop the possessive word my, or if he drops it, then he cannot maintain his own position that ownership is always transferable and that since the experiences are said to be owned by the ego in a non-transferable sense, they are not owned by anything. This inability to drop the word my or any other possessive words like yours, his, theirs, or that person's, while referring to experiences is because of the fact that experiences, for example, a toothache, a headache, pleasure, or pain, are particular of a sort such that they cannot be understood without reference to a person. States or experiences, one might say, own their identity as particular to the identity of the person whose states or experiences they are. Now, pointing to this internal incoherence of the no ownership theory, Strawson goes to establish that the states of consciousness and experiences are necessarily possessed by a particular person in the logically non-transferable way. For it is not possible that a particular state or an experience that actually belongs to one should have been possessed by someone else. At this point, Strawson also gets to state that a particular state of consciousness or an experience has got two aspects of ascribability, one with respect to oneself and other with respect to the others. That is, experience of toothache can be ascribed to myself as in sentence I have a toothache, and to another in the sentence Mr. X has a toothache. The important point here is that in both the descriptions the state refers to the same state. Toothache has the same meaning in both the cases. The dictionary does not have two sets of meaning, one for use and another for second and a third person use for a particular state. We can observe here that with the thesis of a two-day ascribability of states of experiences, Strawson tries to avoid the problems given rise to by diseases of no ownership theory and the Cartesianism. Also, it is supposed to have solved the problem of other minds. Now, we'll have to see what Strawson said on Cartesianism. Now, if we see Descartes, we'll find that Descartes has advocated of two substances, mind or ego and the body. Now, each of the two is diametrically opposite in character, and so far as these particular things are concerned, that means mind and body, they are totally opposite to each other. So far as mind is concerned, it is non-physical, and so far as body is concerned, it is totally physical. Hence, for him, mind cannot possess any of the physical characteristics such as length, breadth, height, weight, etc. Similarly, Body also cannot have any of the states of consciousness such as thought, feeling, willings, etc. Therefore, it is not possible, according to Descartes, to ascribe both types of characteristics to one and the same thing. In other words, all states of consciousness and experiences are ascribed to the ego. This ego is the owner of our experiences. But Strawson, on the other hand, points out that serious difficulty which is found in Cartesianism. According to him, a serious difficulty with the Cartesian thesis of an ego owing to our experiences only. Now, so far as the difficulty lies in the facts that in order to ascribe a state or an experience to something, you'll find that that something should be identifiable and individuable. Now, but the problem is that in the absence of any physical characteristics, an ego remains an undefinable and unindividualizable. That is, we cannot point to anything and say that it is an ego, because anything without shape, size, color, or other physical attributes cannot be pointed as it. Now, it means a thing that is distinguished from other things, and the basis of this distinction is physical characteristics such as color, shape, and the like. Now, it is distinguished means that it is individuated and identified. But ego cannot be so identified in absence of the physical attributes. Hence, the question of ascribing states and experiences to it does not arise. Strawson here considers a defense of Cartesianism. The ego or the subject of consciousness can be thought to be identified indirectly with reference to the particular body to which the subject stands in a spatial relation. Now, but such a solution is of no use, because in that case there would be no point in ascribing experience to an ego rather than to the body. Moreover, there is the logical possibility that there may be more than one subject attached to one and the same body. The uniqueness of the body does not guarantee uniqueness of the Cartesian soul. It is mentioned in his book Individual in the page number 101. Now, what Strawson thinks is the way to come out of this difficulty is to acknowledge the primitiveness of the concept of person. What I mean by concept of person is the concept of a type of entity such that both predicates ascribing states of consciousness and predicates ascribing corporeal characteristics of physical situation and physical situations are equally applicable to a single individual of the single type. Now, so far as Strawson is concerned, it is said that what Strawson actually means by calling the concept of person a primitive concept can be explained in his own word in the following way. We are tempted to think of a person as a sort of compound of two kinds of subjects: a subject of experiences of pure consciousness, ego. On the other hand, a subject corporeal attributes on the other. But the Strawson points out a lot of difficulties in maintaining its duality. After considering all these difficulties here, he therefore concluded that the concept of person is logically prior to that of an individual consciousness. The concept of person is not to be analyzed as that of an animated body or of an embodied anima, that is, which is written in his book Individual in the page number 103. However, he does not rule out the possibility of an ego existing as a secondary entity. A person is not an embodied ego, but an ego might be a disembodied person retaining the logical benefit of individuality from having been a person. Now, let us discuss Strawson's distinction between P and the M predicate. Now, so far as Strawson is concerned, he makes it a point to be noted that one can ascribe states of consciousness to oneself only when one ascribe or is prepared to ascribe them to other. This other includes oneself are of type of entity that can be individuated. That is, They must be admit of both the states of consciousness and the corporal characteristics at the same time. Now, if we see Strawson, we'll find that he makes a distinction between two kinds of predicates that are applied, and these predicates are something which are applied to persons. Now, the first kind of predicate are those that are also applied to material bodies, to which states of consciousness are never applied. He calls this first kind of predicates to be M predicates, which include predicates like height, weights, 10 stone, is in the drawing room, etc. Now, so far as the second kind of predicates is concerned, it consists of all other predicates we apply to persons, like smiling is going for a way. He is smiling is going for a walk, as well as he is in pain, is thinking hard, etc. Now, Strawson insists that both these two types of predicates are ascribed to one and the same thing, that is person. Now, concept of a person is a primitive concept in the sense that it is not analyzable into a particular consciousness, that is mind and a body, because a person is not combination of a mind and a body. He also says that there is no type of ambiguity between I and Smith. That means I and Smith are not individuals of two different types. Type ambiguities are found only in case of predicates like is in the drawing room and is hit by a stone, because they have completely different meanings when applied to a person and when applied to a material body. Now, let us discuss the concept of P predicates, which was offered by Strawson. Now, of the two kinds of predicates, that is M predicate and P predicate, the M predicate is not at all problematic. They are but predicate ascribing material properties. But what Strawson means by P predicates requires special care to be understood. This is because under the heading P predicates, he includes all those which we would not dream of applying to material bodies. In other words, P predicates are ascribed to persons only. All P predicates are, however, not consciousness predicates like is intelligent or is in pensive mode, but still they imply the possession of consciousness on the part of that to which they are ascribed. It is written in his book Individual in the page number 105. Thus, is going for a walk is not a consciousness predicate, since it has nothing directly to do with the consciousness. But still, it is a P predicate because it is exclusively applied to a person and not to anything else. A P predicate is ascribed to others on the strength of observation of the behavior, but this behavior on the part of other is not just a sign from which presence of a state of consciousness is to be inferred. Rather, Strawson emphatically states that behavior is the logically adequate criteria for ascribing pre-predicate to others. The argument from analogy of one's own case for applying states of consciousness to another does not arise at all, because Strawsons maintain that a state of consciousness can be ascribed to something only when that something can be identified, and this indefinability depends upon its having a physical body. So the skeptical doubt about the presence of a state of consciousness in another does not arise. One's behavior logically justified ascribing of the states of consciousness to one. But on the one does not rely upon the behavior criterion to apply some of the P predicates to oneself. As for example, I am angry, I am sad, I am happy, etc. But in case of some other class of P predicates that concern assessment of character, I am honest or capability, can lift 50 kg weight, one has to rely on the same behavior criteria in order to apply them to oneself. Strawson here considers a possible difficulty, the difficulty of resolving the question which of the ascription of P predicates first person, ascription of third person, ascription is primary. This seems to be two contrary approaches. Suppose we write PX as the general form of expression for ascription of P predicates. Now, according to one person, X is to be replaced by I in the primary sense and is replacing with any other second or the third person pronoun or noun is secondary and derivative. Now, on the other hand, according to the other person, X is to be replaced by he, that person, and other third person pronoun or noun in the primary sense. In that case, the use of I in replace of X would be secondary and not proper. But Strawson maintains it is essential to the character of these predicates that they have both first and third person ascriptive uses, that they are both self-ascribable and other-ascribable. Now, to learn their uses is to learn both aspects of their use. That is, to ascribe these P predicates to oneself, one has to know how to ascribe them to others. On the other hand, one also has to admit that others can also be ascribed them to themselves as well as to those who are different from themselves. Now, in both the ascription, it means the same thing. Strawson here gives the example of the mental states of depression. When Mr. X says, I am depressed, it is fitting on X part. But it is particular set of X observable behavior for others. But it is the same thing in both the cases. X depression is something one and the same thing which is felt but not observed by X and observed but not felt by other X. This particular line of thinking can rid us of the dichotomy between a philosophical skepticism and a philosophical behaviorism. Now, throughout the essay, that is the essay in descriptive metaphysics, Strawson always takes a great care to establish that the states of consciousness are ascribed to one and the same thing, to which also are ascribed physical situations, etc. And that these ascriptions of consciousness predicates have two aspects: self-ascriptive and the other-ascriptive. And so far as these two particular things are concerned, we'll find that both being the aspect of the same status, neither is primary to the other. In this concern, Strawson further maintains that this line of thinking is possible only when the primitive of the concept of person is acknowledged. So this is in brief about the concept of person as given to us by the Strawson. Now, let us discuss Bernard Williams' view on Strawson's concept of P predicates. Bernard Williams, in his book Problems of the Self, points out certain difficulties in the concept of P predicate as stated by Strawson. Certain P predicates have nothing peculiarity to do with consciousness, as for example in case of is playing football, is coiling a rope, or is in drawing room. For once, we see that many P predicates are highly corporeal. We may begin to wonder which corporeal predicates really are M predicates. Now, these predicates are mostly dominated by physical movement or the part of the persons concerned. So far as their characteristics are concerned, we must have to admit that they are characteristically different from M predicates. Again, the predicate is running downhill can be meaningfully applied to a person, a dog, and also to a stream. Now, in the Strawsonian scheme, it would be a P predicate in case of a person, while it would be an M predicate in other two cases. It may be mentioned here that when applied to a stream, it running downhill is a figurative use of the predicate borrowed from its original and appropriate use in case of a person. However, it may be said to be a lapse in Strawson's not to speak anything about the lower animal. A dog runs in the same sense in which a man runs, but whether we can call a predicate applied to a lower animal P predicate. Strawson is silent on this point. Again, although Strawson is against any analysis of the concept of person into a body and an ego, he still maintains that ego can have a logically secondary type of existence. A person is not an embodied ego, but an ego might be a disembodied person retaining the logical benefit of individuality from having been a person. But this assertion of existence of a disembodied ego is not in conformity with his concept of individual and identification. For a disembodied ego, by definition, does not possess any of the physical characteristics and hence cannot either individual or identified. Again, following his definition of a person as a type of entity to which both physical as well as conscious states are ascribed, at the same time, we probably cannot call a disembodied ego even if there is one or a former person, as this ego does not admit of any physical states. Despite these loopholes, Strawson's concept of person occupies a very unique position in modern analytic philosophy. Now, this is in brief about the concept of person given by Strawson and also the criticisms or the limitation offered by Bernard Williams. Now, let us see what we have discussed in this chapter. Number one, Strawson holds that both physical characteristics and states of consciousness are ascribed at the same time to one and the same thing, that is person. Secondly, Strawson's concept of person is primitive concept in the sense that it is not analyzable into a particular consciousness, that is mind, and a body, because a person is not a combination of a mind and body. He also says that there is no type ambiguity between I and Smith, that is, I and Smith are not individuals of two different times. Thirdly, according to Cartesians, a person is actually a combination of two distinct substances, mind and body, each of which has its own characteristics. Fourthly, according to the no ownership theory, our states of consciousness cannot be ascribed to anything. Fifthly, Strawson goes to establish that the states of consciousness and experiences are necessarily possessed by a particular person in the logically transferable way. Sixthly, Strawson points out that a particular state of consciousness or an experience has got two aspects of ascribability, one with the respect of oneself and other with the respect of others. Next, he says that according to Strawson, it is found that according to Strawson, the concept of a person is the concept of a type of entity such that both predicates of consciousness and the predicates of corporeal characteristics are equally applicable to single individual. In the next point, we have found that Strawson makes a distinction between M predicates and P predicates. M predicates can be applied to material bodies to which states of consciousness are never applied. P predicates consist of all other predicates such as smiling, walking, thinking, etc., which we apply to persons. Another point which was mentioned, we have found in this unit A, Strawson insists that both am and P predicates are ascribed to one and the same thing, that is person. And the last point which we have found here is Strawson's concept of person is also not free from difficulties, yet it occupies a very, very unique position in the modern analytic philosophy. So, this is in brief about the Strawson's concept of person. I think we have discussed it thoroughly and you have also understood it. You have understood what Strawson have said about the concept of person. You have found the difference between Strawson's concept of person and Cartesian concept of person. We have also came to know about no ownership theory. We have come to know the difference between M predicate and P predicate. You have know what you have understood what is M predicate and what is P predicate, and you have also found the difference between the two, and we have also found the limitation described by Barnett Williams, in this particular content. So learners, I think you have understood about it and it will be helpful about you. Thank you so much.